Well, in arguments, whether with your spouse or with your family members or with your friends, do you always just want to be right or righter, you know? Do you fight to win arguments? Another question is that when it comes to prayer, when you're turning to God in prayer, are there prayer requests that you feel, this one I shouldn't even ask God, this one I should actually do it? Am I not capable of doing this? Do you have moments where you feel you have some self-sufficiency within you and you think you can make it? So what's the point of trusting God? I think this is something I can actually do. Well, to those of us who probably think about our egos, do you have a sensitive ego? Are you often unwilling to consider the opinions of others? Do you stand being corrected by others? And in fact, when you're wrong, would you rather do anything else other than saying sorry or asking for forgiveness? Well, if this is you, if you have checked in any of those particular questions, please, the WhatsApp invite has been shared all around. Please, let's just meet behind the tent. We are all part of that pride group. So welcome, proud people, to this particular sermon as God tries to help us to think about this. Now, those scenarios just point us to try and think about how does this sin reflect itself in our hearts? Entitlement, self-centeredness, self-sufficiency. C.S. Lewis in his book, Mere Christianity, makes a very interesting observation. He says that if you want to know how proud you are, the easiest question to ask is this: how much do I dislike it when other people ignore me, humiliate me, and refuse to take notice of me? I'm going to say that again. If you want to know, the easiest way to know how proud you are, or probably the yardstick of knowing whether you're struggling with this is what C.S. Lewis says in his book, Mere Christianity. How much do you dislike it when other people do what? Ignore you. When other people do what? Humiliate you. And when other people do what? Refuse to take notice of you. And therefore, if all of us are in that particular pride group, please, tutapewa chai na mahamri na vitumbua on my bill, because there is need for us to be able to reflect on these things. But how then would I define pride? How would I define pride? I would define pride as pride is a sinful inclination of the human heart to consider self above God and above others. I'll actually repeat that again, that pride is what? The sinful inclination of the human heart to do what? To consider self above who? Above God, and to consider self above others. And the struggle with this sin is not something that is new. The struggle with this sin starts in the Garden of Eden. It starts with the first parents that we have. This cancer called pride starts with the first rebellion that ever happened in this universe. What do we see in Genesis 3? We see Adam and Eve created in the likeness and the nature of who? Of God. We see God planting them in this particular garden, giving them instructions that they are to eat of every tree except this particular tree of what? Good and evil. But again, Satan comes through the serpent and asks this question: did God really say? He poses this particular question to them: did God really say that you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Did God really say that you shall surely not die? And this proposal comes to Eve, and Eve sits and thinks, and the question they are in, if you're to go to the question behind the question is, why should you dare consider God's command? Why would you dare consider the options that God has given you? Why would you then dare consider the preposition that God has given to mankind, that he's given you the freedom to enjoy all these fruits? And if you're to think about the fruits and the varieties in their glorified states, right? Think about the avocado that you're enjoying or the mango that you're enjoying. That mango is fallen, guys. It's fallen. So think about before the fall, that mango, that avocado, that fruit in its glorious state, in its, countless levels of varieties of all fruits that this world could give. That is what Adam and Eve had. But there was this limitation of this one particular fruit, this particular tree, and Satan comes and asks, is God worthwhile for us to trust his command? And what happens? Eve decides, great instructions, God, I hear you, but I'm going to also try and have something for myself, because what did the serpent promise? That you will surely be like who? Like God. And therefore, therein we see Eve and Adam esteeming themselves better than God's instruction, rebelling against God and setting us up on this path of sin. The serpent promised exaltation, not humility. The promise was, God does not know what he's saying. I know that you will be like God. And therein we see the first sin coming into play. One of the things that pride says, I know better. I bow to no one. I seek to achieve my greater ends using my best possible means regardless. Pride says in that particular attitude of the heart that I am independent of God. I can do what I want to do. But again, that sin doesn't stop there. Genesis 11. What do we see in Genesis 11? The Tower of Babel. These guys gather and they say, we want to make a name for ourselves. They want to make this particular tower that will top in heaven, and they want to glorify their name and to make a name for themselves so that they can get their own reputation, so that they can make their own glory. And this reminds me of our local poets. Probably the younger generations will be able to know this song that has been sung, that I want to be rich, I want to be famous. That the idea is that I want to make lots and lots of what? Of money. I see Gen Zs here are like, they know that song very, very well, right? And probably that points to that whole idea of the desire of man to want to make a name for themselves. In other words, when you think about the whole idea of the Tower of Babel, they wanted to exalt themselves and make this tower, which its top will actually make it to heaven. And they hoped to actually make a name for themselves apart from God's glory. It's as though because of the fall, the natural tendency of the human heart is one to glorify ourselves. That our natural disposition is to actually make a name for ourselves and to glorify ourselves and to say at the end of the day, I am independent. I am the one who did this by my own strength. But let's go again, ask ourselves this question. Then what often leads to pride? What then often puffs us up to get to the point of pride? How do we end up becoming proud people on account, firstly, of the fall? Because again, what Adam and Eve did, they threw their fists again against God and said, Lord, you are not worthy of our worship. We can actually choose to live our lives and choose our own path and be captains of our lives and desire to take the path that would lead us to ourselves. What then leads us to pride? The first thing is your natural abilities and intellectual talents. It does puff us up to actually get to a point of pride. And here's a case study. I want us just to more or less make a couple of comments as we will go through a couple of characters in the scriptures. And my hope is that I'll be able just to make comments here as we go along. When you think about natural abilities and intellectual talents, I want us to think about Saul. Saul, he's the first king of Israel, right? Saul comes into the picture as a guy in 1 Samuel 9:1. It says this, it says that there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of that particular name, the son of Aphia, a Benjamite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was who? Was Saul. Then we are told about some characteristics about Saul, that Saul was a handsome young man. And then it says this, when the Bible says these statements, you have to take them clearly because these scriptures were inspired by God. So when the Bible calls you handsome, it's not an issue of, not my type, it's not a maybe, or when scripture says this person was beautiful or handsome, it actually means that you could see them and you're like, OMG. From what earth did you come from, Then it says that he was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. Yani, that description, not just handsome, but there was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. And then it says again, scripture is very vivid. It goes ahead to explain. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. This is the description of Saul getting into the scene. We see him as a guy, first of all, coming from a wealthy background. That's the first thing. So he's coming from a wealthy heritage. So he has the money, he has the bank, he has the shekels and the silver, whatever, from his family. But also he's handsome. Again, not just handsome, but he's a man who was the most handsome among the people. Again, from his shoulders upwards, he was taller. And then he's brought into the scene to be anointed. And how he comes into the scene is quite interesting. Donkeys have to get lost so that he can be brought to the fray. And once he wants to be proclaimed in 1 Samuel chapter 10, they make a lot to actually bring him and to actually proclaim him as king. But in 1 Samuel 10:22, this same guy hides behind the baggages. He doesn't want to be called a king. He has this subtle sense of humility that, hey, history a kingship, not my deal, guys. I would rather hide. And it has to take the people to inquire of the Lord to have Saul come into the picture. This is how Saul gets into kingship. He has this subtle sense of humility, saying that you want to make me king. And not me, guys, not me. He knows he has the features. He is handsome, he's coming from a wealthy family. But again, he hides behind the baggage. But again, he comes, he's installed as king by Prophet Samuel. And again, we see him getting into that particular path of kingship. But later on, something interesting happens. There's that whole scene of 1 Samuel 17 of David and Goliath. And he's caught up in that whole fray, wondering, what should we do? David comes again into the scene. David is just minding his own business. He was being sent to take food to his brothers, finds himself in that particular space, hears that these guys are desecrating the name of God, and he feels he needs to do something about it, goes ahead and kills who? Goliath. Then thereafter, in 1 Samuel 18, something else happens. After Goliath has died, and David has now won the war, the women start singing a song. What do they sing and what do they say? No, women, happy Mother's Day. Yeah? What do the women do? They sing a song, right? They say, Saul has killed thousands and David has killed tens of thousands. And you can imagine him walking. You know, this is the tall guy, the wealthy guy. Now he's given power. He didn't have just the looks. He now has the power, but now he lacks the praise. And now the women there are singing and they are saying, Saul has killed thousands. His thousands, and he killed his thousands, that's true. But David has killed his tens. Now the women are saying this because the one guy has died. You need to see that comparison, so that you understand what is happening in the heart of Saul. David only killed Goliath, but the women came to this interesting praise of welcoming David and saying, oh, what a man. Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed tens of thousands. And it's at that particular point of that particular song, as that song sings, where we see Saul's heart change, and he goes ahead and becomes envious. What Reverend Isaac was talking about, that envy does not only just stop at wanting what the other person has, but also wants to exterminate and remove that particular person from the scene. Saul has this indignant wrath that he's willing even to kill his own son, who is a friend to who? To David. And you have to ask yourself, what's the issue? What's happening in your heart, Saul? What is this thing happening in your heart? One of the things that we see is that Saul had this competitive nature within him to even wonder and ask, how dare you praise David? Who is David? Why is he worth that praise? Again, remember that David was the guy who was given those shields to try and even wear the armor, and he couldn't actually have any of them. Behind Saul's idea to want to kill David was a proud heart that gave birth to envy, that was willing to end up giving birth to murder. And this insatiable desire was, how dare you praise David? He compared himself to David and wondered, who is David worth of such praise from women? Am I not the tallest, the most handsome of men? Am I not the king of Israel? Now, when you think about the nature of pride, we human beings often get to the point of pride because of our own competitive nature. If we were all equal in riches, equal in cleverness, equal in looks and beauty and handsomeness, equal in every other thing that you could think, then we wouldn't have any need to want to be proud of anything. Why? Because pride desires to set themselves above the rest. And I was thinking about this, I remembered the KQ jingle, the pride of Africa, you know? We are at the topmost of it. That's the idea. Pride seeks to always be, it longs for superiority. And so one of the things that causes us to be proud is we look at our intellectual abilities, we look at our talents, we look at our looks, we look at our cleverness, our smartness, and we throw this haughty eye and contempt to those who we think are below us. But here's the second thing that also causes us to be puffed up and to have pride: earthly possessions. Earthly possessions. The things that God gives us, the things that we have, the things that we own, or the things that are bequeathed to us, causes us to have a sense of pride. When God was speaking to the children of Israel after he was promising them that when they have crossed to the other side, he did warn them about this particular issue. We find this in Deuteronomy chapter 8. I'll be able to read just from verses 7 all through to verses 12. This is what it says. Deuteronomy 8 verses 7, it says, "For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains, of springs flowing out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and of fig trees, and of pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you." Then verses 11, "Take care lest you forget the who? The Lord your God, by not keeping his commandments and his what? His rules or laws and his statutes or decrees which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are what? And are full and have done what? Build or furnished good houses and live in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is what? Multiplied." Think about that. That whole space of true abundance. True abundance. Flocks, you're eating the fruit, you're living in good houses, your herds and your flocks are multiplying, your silver and gold has multiplied, and also all that you have has done what? Verses 14 says this: "Then your heart will become what? Proud, and you will forget who? The Lord your God, who did what? Who brought you out the land of Egypt, the land of slavery." Earthly possessions have a way to spur us and to puff us up to get to certain levels. And here scripture says, when these same Israelites are the ones who saw the parting of the Red Sea, they're the guys who circled back, and probably they have the promises of what life was like in the wilderness. And God says, when you cross over to the other side, when God grants you success on the other side, because he's promised that and he's faithful, then watch out lest your heart be proud. And then what is the natural tendency of a proud heart? It forgets God. Brothers and sisters, pride looks at God-given gifts and asks, who is like me? It asks, did I not work for this and sweat for this? Is this not a work of my own effort? Is this not a tower of my own success? Is this not a building up of my atomic habits devoid of God's help? Earthly possessions can get ourselves to the place of looking at our lives and feeling that we have achieved. Therefore, we can pride ourselves in what God has given us. But here's also how sometimes pride does show itself. Remember the text that we will later on look at, which is Proverbs 6, the text, it talks about pride as haughty eyes. And we're going to talk about that. Pride also has a way of looking at people with contempt, especially when it comes to earthly possessions. I don't know whether you had this opportunity where you're listening to probably a group of people and they're sharing about their finances and what they are planning and how they are struggling in this routonomics. You know, Singapore, whatever this is, whatever is pouring, you know, we don't know. And you wonder, Kwani, you don't plan your life. You don't have a 10-year plan, and you look at people wondering, why don't you plan your life? Haujajipanga? Like, this is the 21st century with all the information. Pride looks at how other people are struggling in their own earthly positions and things. Why wouldn't you not be a good planner in your life? In view of earthly possessions, it forgets God. It forgets that God is the one who gives us the power to make wealth. The proud live their lives with a sure confidence of their wealth, and therefore the result of this is boasting. The result of that kind of life is boasting, and James has a text that points us to how the proud live out their way. He says this in James 4:13-17. He says this, come now you who say, today or tomorrow we will go in such and such a town and spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why do you not even now even know what will happen tomorrow? What is your life? You are what? A mist that appears for a little while and then does what? Vanishes. And it says instead, what do you ought to do? If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. And it says, as it is, you boast on your arrogance. All such boasting is what? Evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is what? It is sin. When we already have ability to have pride in our intellectual abilities, in our appearance, in the wealth, the proud live their lives with a false view of boasting about tomorrow. The proud live with the idea that tomorrow is secure because I am intelligent, I deserve what the world should give me, and I have all the wealth that the world could give me. And therefore the proud live their lives with a false sense of assurance about tomorrow. And James warns us about this. We ought not to boast about what? Tomorrow. We ought not to say that this is how my 10-year plan will look like. It says, if we look at the future, we have to say, if the Lord wills. Again, the proud don't see the will of God. They don't see the sovereign hand of God being able to move around to orchestrate all things for his glory. But the proud live with a sure confidence of self and a sense of independence that we will be able to make it because we are the captains of our ships, because we think we are the captains of our own destiny. But here's the third way also, how pride reveals itself. Pride also reveals itself in our moral and spiritual virtues as Christians, especially. Pride masquerades in our testimonies and praise reports. In our roads to maturity, we often don't remember how far God has brought us and how far God has saved us. And also this leads to this whole idea of spiritual pride that tends to speak to other people with a sense or an aura of contempt. And in Luke 18, 9 to 12, Jesus actually outlines a parable for the proud. In Luke 18, let me just open that up. Luke 18, 19. Luke 18, 9 to 12, sorry. So it says, the ESV says, he told, and the NIV, he says, he also told this parable to some, again, who are these? Who trusted in themselves, that they were righteous and treated others with what? With contempt. Jesus, in his time and his interaction with people, he saw that there were people who had this sense of contempt and who trusted again in themselves. And he told this parable. He says, 2 men went up into a temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Then he says the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. What do? I fast twice a week. What else do? I give a tenth of all I get. Verse 13, what does verse 13 say? Could continue with the ESV version. It says this. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes to the heaven, but bet his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Then this is what Jesus ended up saying, that I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. And here Jesus goes ahead and talks about these 2 people, and he said, this one comes and says, oh, look at me. He stands before, again, he's coming to God in prayer, but what does he say to God? God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. Oh God, look at me. I'm the super saint. I am not the robber, the evildoer, the adulterer, or even this tax collector. This particular text gives us this whole idea of how the haughty-eyed and how pride looks down on other people's righteousness and personhood and dignity and status. It shows contempt to them. Proverbs 21:4 would say, haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked, are sin. To the spiritual proud, they have this unhealthy comparison to think of themselves that they are first-class saints. And they think that because of their works, because they give their tithes, because they fast every time, because they attend church, because they think they are part of a real group, because they pray and fast and have their QT, because they think that they have a clean streak on their YouVersion reading plan. They come and think that, God, you ought to have my audience. You ought to have my audience. I'm not like other people. We all know how sneering it can be when we look at people with an aura of contempt. We all know how kiburi in the eyes, where someone can give you that one glance and put you in your place without even saying a word. And here Jesus calls us to actually know that we ought not to have spiritual pride in our own hearts. We ought not to carry within ourselves spiritual pride that helps us to think that because other saints have been sanctified by faith, we think we are superior because of our theological knowledge, or we think we are superior because of our spiritual gifting, or we think we are superior because we've grappled with theological concepts, or we think we have figured out God more than others, and therefore we look at others and think, why haven't you figured out God or faith or salvation the way that I have? Pride seeks to pursue an unhealthy comparison and says, why are you not like I? Pride is so self-focused such that it blinds our eyes to actually set ourselves as the standard of what ought to be. And therefore Jesus cautions us and says we ought not to think about this. Here's another question then. How does God deal with the proud? Firstly, God knows the proud. God knows the proud. In Psalms 138 verses 6 it says, for you though the Lord is exalted, yet he does regard the lowly, but the proud he knows from afar. God sees the proud at heart from afar. But also, not only does God know the proud, but also God does oppose the proud. In James 4:6, it says, God does oppose the proud. In Psalms 101 verses 5, the Psalm of David, he says, whoever slanders their neighbor in secret, I will put to silence. Whoever has haughty eyes and a proud heart, I will not tolerate. God says that he will not tolerate the proud. Proverbs 8:13, he says to fear the Lord is to hate evil. And this is what God says, I hate arrogant pride, evil conduct, and perverse speech. And therefore God says, this particular sin of pride, if you have it, it's an affront to the glory of God, and therefore you have set yourself against God. Let's meet face to face and see who's gonna win. And because God hates the proud, he does something about it. And I just want to focus on one other character here who got the wrath of what pride was with regards to his life. The text is Acts 12. Acts 12, we are introduced to a guy called King Herod. King Herod seeks to arrest some who belonged to the Church of Christ, who are persecuting the church. So he takes James and John, and he goes ahead and executes those disciples. And this is let me just open it up so that we read it together. Acts 12. Acts chapter 12. It says, about that time, King Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. What does he do? He killed James, the brother of John, with the what? With a sword. And when he saw that it pleased who? The Jews. Again, see how pride works. He's gone ahead and killed James. And because he wants approval, he wants to be the people pleaser to the Jews. What does he do? He gets the second lot of guys. He arrests what? Peter. This was during the days of the unleavened bread. Then later on, we see him capturing Peter, and here the church goes and prays, and God again gives a rescuing great work of Peter exiting from the prison. And later on in verses 21, it says this, verses 20, he says, now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to him with one accord, and having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain. They asked for peace because their country depended on the king's country for food. And then verses 21, after this whole peace pact has been set out, the people of Tyre and Sidon have actually created a pact with him, and therefore there's peace with that space. Verses 21, on that appointed day, Herod put on his royal what? Robes. He took his seat upon the throne, and then he delivered what? An oration, or what does NIV says, a public address to the people. And verses 22 says what? They shouted, "This is the voice of who? Of a God, not of a man." And immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, what happened? An angel of the Lord did what? Struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and did what? And then verses 24, very interesting comment. But the word of God continued to spread and what? And flourish. Here is a king. He's taken James. He's killed him. Again, because he wanted to please the people. Again, he was doing this because of he's the king and he wants to gain the joy and probably the good of the people. He goes ahead and does something interesting. Goes ahead and takes who? Peter. Peter is rescued, and now he's up there giving his speech. And a guy called Josephus has more or less, a historian, has captured this well, that Herod had probably a silver-coated kind of robe, that if the sun hit that particular robe, it would radiate light to the other places. And therefore he wore it and gave this great oratory speech. And the people were like, my, oh my. This is the voice of who? Of a God, and not of a man. He got this flattery and accolades and praise. But see what happened. Immediately, an angel of the Lord struck him down. Why? Because he did not give glory to who? To God. This was one of those moments where probably Herod, in our current context, probably would come and say, I want to thank me, Because he just released a great speech. And he gets all this flattery, he gets all this glory, but he forgets to ascribe all that glory to who? To God. Brothers and sisters, one of the things that also pride happens, please be wary of the flattery of people in true things that you do. People will come to you telling you, such a great job at the workplace. Oh, you are this intelligent, you have this gift, you are this handsome, you're this. Look out for that and remember that all glory should go back to who? To God, because God does oppose the proud. We have to watch this out, because there's a difference between appreciating a pat on the back for a good job done and being happy that we did so well and thinking that what a fine person I must be to have done this. My prayer is that God will help us to actually reflect on these things and watch out for the times we have received flattery. But then how then do we kill pride? As I come to a conclusion, here are 3 ways we have to kill pride. Firstly, we have to acknowledge that we are proud people. We have to acknowledge and sit within ourselves and know that we are proud. We take pride in our beauty, we take pride in our intelligence, we take pride in our wise and wealthy, skilled or giftedness. We take pride, we boast in those things that we didn't earn. We have to acknowledge that we are proud people and that we are sick at heart and that we don't deserve any praises, whether it's with regards to our talents or our success, because why? We are nothing apart from God's saving faith. There is nothing that you would choose on this life to boast on apart from that which God has given you on account of his common grace. And therefore we need to know that we are in need of salvation. Because if we stay on this particular path of pride, we will self-destruct. We also have to lean hard in our acknowledgement of pride. We need to lean hard on our community to yield us to correction. This calls us to be like the tax collector who doesn't look up, but who looks down and says, I am such a sinner. I am such a proud person. I glory in my beauty. I glory in my wealth. I glory in my skills. Lord, come to me and forgive me because of this sin of pride. James 4:7 would say, submit one another to God. We are to come to him and acknowledge that we are proud people. Secondly, we have to embrace the attitude of humility. The antidote to pride is humility. James 4:10 would say, humble yourself before the Lord and he will do what? He will lift you up. We are to think of ourselves less and esteem others better than ourselves. We are to acknowledge that every good and perfect gift comes from the Father of lights. And thirdly, the final blow of pride is that we are to contemplate Christ's humility. Why? Because scripture will tell us that he is humble and gentle at heart. We are to arm ourselves with the attitude of humility. Why? Because Jesus did not take upon himself to pride himself in who he is. Why? Philippians 2:6-8, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped or to be used in his own advantage, but rather he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, and being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. We have to look at Christ and contemplate. Jesus had all the right to stand and say, I am proud. I am proud to be the Son of God. I'm not willing to bridge this infinite gap that exists between me and you. But he came and said, I will come and save you who are sinners and bridge that infinite gap that existed between us and God. The best way for us to be able to also kill pride is to look at the cross and know that the second Adam didn't ask, did God really say? He didn't question that, did God really say that I should come and die on the cross? But he died once and for all and said, it is finished. And therefore pride was sufficiently dealt on that cross. The invitation today is not to do a management of your pride. No. The invitation today is to crucify the deeds of the flesh and to crucify your pride daily. May the Lord bless us all.